Inflation rises to 12.13%, highest in 12 months, just as IMF cuts Nigeria's 2020 economic growth forecast, and World Bank approves 6 development projects for Nigeria in 2020, while investors hedge stock market highs amid coronavirus fears. You are watching Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital, on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. I am Amina Nujem. Thanks for joining us. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) has announced a downward review of its 2020 growth forecast for Nigeria to 2% from 2.5%. It predicted earlier. The IMF, which stated this in its Article 4 consultation on Nigeria, noted that Nigeria's pace of economic recovery remains slow as declining real incomes and weak investment continues to weigh on economic activity. Inflation, which it said is driven by high food prices, has risen, marking the end of deflationary trend seen in 2019. The IMF said external vulnerabilities are increasing, reflecting a higher current account deficit and declining reserves that remains highly vulnerable to capital flow reversal, even though the exchange rate has remained stable, helped by steady sales of foreign exchange in various windows. And the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNP) says the country lost about $750 million to crude oil theft in 2019. Group Managing Director of the NNPC, Mele Kyari, stated this when he received a delegation from the Executive Intelligence Management Course 13 of the National Institute for Security Studies, explaining challenges of insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea as a threat to international trade, national security and sustainable development of member states. Kyari called for synergy among stakeholders to secure the oil and gas sector for national development.
Nothing you can do in this country that you cannot connect to NNPC's activity, including agriculture. Therefore, in the scheme of things, when you have the activities of NNPC threatened by anything, it literally means that the entire security framework of this country is threatened.
Statistics by the NNPC indicates that in 2016, the Gulf of Guinea accounted for 34 kidnap cases of seafarers, out in 62 cases globally. The team from the National Institute for Security Studies, drawn from 18 agencies within and outside Nigeria, pledged support to tackle insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea. And Nigeria's inflation rate has increased for the 5th straight month from 11.98% recorded in December of 2019 to 12.13% in January 2020. This is the highest rate recorded in the country since May of 2018. Bosede Ebel has details of these figures.
The Consumer Price Index, CPI, which measures inflation, increased by 12.13% year-on-year in January 2020. This is 0.15% points higher than the rate recorded in December 2019. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that on month-on-month basis, the headline index increased by 0.87% in January 2020. This is 0.02% rate higher than the rate recorded in December 2019. The urban inflation rate increased by 12.78% year-on-year in January 2020 from 12.62% recorded in December 2019, while the rural inflation rate increased by 11.54% in January 2020. On a month-on-month basis, the urban index rose by 0.92% in January 2020, while the rural index also rose by 0.83% in January 2020, up by 0.01% from the rates recorded in December 2019. The composite food index rose by 14.85% in January 2020 compared to 14.67% in December 2019. This rise in food index was caused by increases in prices of bread and cereals, meat, oils and fats, potatoes, yam and other tubers, and fish.
Thank you, Boss Eddie. The report on the rising inflation figures and the corresponding accelerated food prices comes at a time when the International Monetary Fund cut its growth forecast for Nigeria. Well, that will be our focus on our discussion today on Business Express. Our guest is Henry Etema. He is a consultant statistician and an economist. Glad to have you on the program again.
Thank you for having me.
Talking about statistics, in December 2019, we had a figure of 11.98%. Now, a figure of 12.13%. Would you say this was a figure that was coming? Was it expected?
Well, you remember last time we were here, we discussed this. This figure was expected. Taking into cognizance so many factors that have come to play. You know, at the time we had our borders closed, very good indicators emerged, which is also a blessing and a challenge to the productive forces in the system. We realized that most of the food we eat, or quite a sizable amount of the food we eat, come from neighboring countries, particularly these areas that have seen their prices go up. Cooking oil, meat, things like frozen turkey, chicken. You go to a market now, you don't see them. So the poultry industry, the oil processing, palm oil, groundnut oil processing, people. In fact, the one that is shocking is the area of cereals and bread. And when you look at all these things...
Why is that shocking?
It is shocking that initially we felt we are in a position to boast that in the area of cereals, although we paid more attention to area of rice, but we are neglecting millet, guinea corn, and maize. And to that detriment, and again, the disruption in the northeast economy. The northeastern zone economy has been so disrupted to the extent that the shortage is beginning to bear on the country. So insecurity, inability to access the farm, created some shortages in production. And given that this is a period, December, January, is a period when harvest has gone down in this area, and you can see yam, you can see beans. The harvest is around December, November, mostly, but coming to January, and the way we are consuming, given that the border is closed, it's a challenge. This little change in the general price level is a call to farmers, it's a call to government, and it's a call to everybody. Some level of inflation is not evil, it could be an incentive.
Okay, let me come in here. You're talking about some of the challenges faced in food production in Nigeria. Now, in recent times, we see the federal government, through the Central Bank of Nigeria, trying to boost local production and the consumption of made in Nigeria goods and services. Now, aside these two these two drives that the government is moving towards, is there anything else that could be done to check some of these shocks?
Yes, I think you know that this government has introduced the National Strategy for Competitiveness in raw materials and products development. That strategy is to leverage science, technology, and innovation to boost production, in the sense that the yield per hectare could be higher when you use better variety. Within the value chain of agricultural production, the Federal Ministry of Science and Technology, using the Raw Material Research and Development Council, is driving the implementation of this national competitiveness strategy to the extent that science, technology, and innovation will come to bear in the way we produce the type of seed we plant, the way we harvest, the way we process. In fact, within the entire value chain, government is beginning to look at how can we be a globally competitive country. In a layman's language, how can we do it well, the way other countries are doing it and making impact.
Okay, talking about, just related to what you're talking about, doing it right. Food inflation rises 14.67%.
Yes.
And January 14.85%.
Yes.
So talking about doing it right.
Yes, you see, you know, this is not just a month-on-month something. And the least you can get in agriculture is annual products. Some palm trees take time to mature for you to harvest. But when we are looking at the major things like the grains we eat, the major staple foods we take, I think what government will mostly look into is, please, the area of internal security, to make sure that even though some areas are no longer producing, those that produce could be freely allowed to transport their things. We must look into the logistics of fixing our roads, because if you look at the items, if you leave food and go to non-food, you see that the area of logistics comes to play. Transportation, moving goods from one place to the other comes to play. The infrastructure in the area of power storage, preservation, and again bringing in science, technology, and innovation to now begin to process and preserve, so that we no longer depend on annual harvest and produce. Okay. Given that our products are becoming more of quality, more of globally required, that we are no longer talking of internal consumption, we are also looking at export.
Okay, still on the subject of inflation, just before the latest data was released, the IMF did observe that inflation is expected to pick up, and while deteriorating in terms of trade and capital flows will weaken the country's external position. How urgent do you see revenue sourcing moving away from oil?
Revenue, government is trying to divest from oil. Government is doing everything. That's why I'm emphasizing on this national strategy for competitiveness. We are no longer looking at oil. We are looking at harnessing our abundant natural raw materials from geo-extractives. We are also looking at the agricultural sector. There's a lot of money involved in these things. And for us to harness them, we must now begin to do it right. No longer in the primordial methods of planting, harvesting. That's why you see the CBN. CBN is coming to intervene in the area of palm produce, seed oil, vegetable oil production, and credit to that sector is enhanced. Farmers are encouraged. They are being organized in a way that cooperatives are beginning to organize themselves into cooperatives so that they can access government incentives. And some of the big private sector people are also going into modern agricultural holdings. Not just the rural farmers, but now modern agricultural holdings are coming up. But they require security, they require infrastructure, and most of all, they require that guarantee that the market will clear whatever they produce. And that is why we are emphasizing on the national quality infrastructure to bear on all our products in terms of conformity assessment and standardization.
Okay, now talking about creating an enabling environment for quick economic development. Now, the IMF, when it reviewed its growth forecast for Nigeria to 2% from 2.5%, it praised the Central Bank of Nigeria for tightening the monetary policy. It also gave credit to government for introducing, say, the finance bill, returning the calendar from January to December, and such stuff like that. You're talking about the efforts of government. Now, looking at the physical Nigerian economy, how do you see these factors shaping 2020?
The factors will shape 2020 if implementation is religious. That is, if we take implementation serious. One thing is to put things on paper, another thing is to implement. And again, tightening monetary policy should not go to the extent that the banking sector will begin to restrict credit to domestic economy to the extent that the productive forces will lack the required credit to invest, the required credit to meet demand of critical inputs that are required. So government is no longer looking at oil as the only way out. Government is encouraging non-oil sectors to the extent that if we leverage on government goodwill now and we are able to instill discipline in management of our resources and begin to block all these leakages. Look at the story of the Gulf of Guinea. You know how much we are losing there as a country, bunkering. You know how much we are losing. You also know how much we are losing in the power sector, people who are diverting from meter and they are not paying electricity bills. You know how many people that are outside the tax net. You see, we must be able to sit down and tell ourselves the truth. Government revenue is not just oil. In the next 10, 15 years, oil will become not that relevant as the solid mineral sector, which many people are going into, and then the agricultural sector, and even services.
I want to read something for you in the article by the IMF.
Yes.
It says Nigeria's border closure will continue to have significant economic consequences on the country's neighbors. It's important that all involved parties quickly resolve the issues keeping the borders closed, including stopping the smuggling of banned items. Considering the recent effort by ECOWAS as our neighbors, do you think, what are your thoughts on this?
You see, ECOWAS Common Industrial Policy and ECOWAS Trade Policy allows ECOWAS to freely trade, human beings to freely move. But again, some people are taking advantage of Nigeria with the huge market we have, depending so much on cheap money that is oil, to allow our neighbors abuse our goodwill. It's even hurting Nigeria. The border closure is not just hurting our neighbors, it's also hurting Nigeria. But it has taught us a lesson and opened some windows for us to actually understand the undercurrent of what is happening with the border closure is not going to be indefinite. Government is putting both fiscal and monetary policy issues in place. Nigeria is one of the most liberal countries in the world where people can quickly come in, do business and exit. Our neighbors and Nigerians are producing almost the same type of agricultural products, consuming almost the same thing. But because the demand pool in the Nigerian side is huge. So we have not been feeling the impact of inflow, particularly through the illegal means. If these things can be documented, one, we must have the data of across the border trade. And we must be able to profile the type of things that are coming in. Are they really of the origin of these countries, or are they re-export of products of other countries outside ECOWAS? These are things we have discovered, and we think that the border closure very soon I believe that the government will lift the border closure.
Well, we'll definitely keep a close eye on developments in that direction.
Yes.
We have been talking to Henry Etema. He is an economist and a statistician. Thank you so much for always joining us on the program.
Thank you for bringing me. Thank you, Nigerians.
The Bankers Committee has accepted a request from the federal government to partner with it in bridging the country's huge infrastructure deficits and have committed to fixing 4 major roads. Director of Banking Supervision at the Central Bank of Nigeria, Bello Hassan, announced this while briefing journalists on the outcome of the Bankers Committee meeting held in Lagos. The Bankers Committee also stated that the CBN's loan-to-deposit ratio policy has been a success, even as lenders were urged to continue to grow credit.
She reviewed the successes recorded on this LDR policy and urged the banks to continue to grow credits because they still have sufficient room to be able to do that.
Consumer credit has grown very well. The corporates who've always had credit have also been availed even more credit, and that for any economy to grow, the SMEs and the retail segment must be availed of credit, and I think the LDR is doing that very well.
Specifically intervening in infrastructure, these are steps being taken to ensure that government is supported in its drive to grow this economy, reduce unemployment, and also overall improve the security of the nation.
Consumer credit, the bankers say, now constitute about 10% of most banks' loan books. And at the close of trade today, the bears continue to dominate stocks as equities market depreciate. To close the trade, the all-share index lost 0.09% to close at 27,523.08 basis point, with market capitalization at 14.3 trillion naira. A total of 290.1 million shares worth 5 million naira in 3,528 deals exchange hands on the floor of the exchange. Guarantee, Zenith Bank and FBN Holdings were the most sought-after stocks. WAPCO led the gainers, followed by C&I Leasing and Afriport, while Fort Oil led the decliners. Now on global market, Asian stocks recover from the coronavirus concerns. Here's a summary of market activities outside the country.
Global market for 19 February 2020 reveals investors are closely monitoring China's progress in returning to work as the country deals with the coronavirus outbreak. Asian markets show recovery from previous deals. Hang Seng Index rose 0.46%, Nikkei was positive 0.89% and closed at 23,400.70, while Shanghai Composite lost 0.32% to 2,975.40. Stocks in US had mostly negative openings. Dow Jones decreased by 0.59%, S&P 500 0.29%, while Nasdaq was up by 0.02%. European stocks advanced. ZAX added 0.42%, FTSE 100 0.98% and CAC 40 0.59%. Here in Africa, the markets were mixed. On the positive territory were South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40 at 0.43% and Namibia's overall index in 0.31%, while Nairobi's all share, Tunisia's Tun index and Ghana's JSE were negative.
Meanwhile, the World Bank has approved 6 projects worth about $2.2 billion to support Nigerian human capital and economic development in 2020. The support will be for projects that include improving immunization, enabling a stronger business environment for the private sector, expanding the digital economy to promote job creation, and increasing public and private sector capacity on governance and social and environmental safeguards. The World Bank says it's carefully targeting its support on high-impact projects as the country works to tackle corruption and lift 100 million of its people out of poverty. Time now to see the prices of commodities on the domestic and international markets. The United Kingdom Consumer Price Index CPI stood at 1.8% last month, ahead of economic forecasts at 1.6% in January, up from 1.3% in December. The Office of the National Statistics said the rise in inflation is largely the result of higher prices at the pump, and F has fallen by less than a year ago. CPI remains below the Bank of England's 2% target for inflation. Wednesday's inflation data pushed the value of the pound above $1.3 versus the euro. The pound had started the day down 0.25, but rose back to trade flat against the single currency. However, some analysts say that the new figures were unlikely to move the dial on the central bank's next decision on interest rates in March. And that's about the size of Business Express for today. Please be informed all previous episodes are available on YouTube on NTA's channel. You can communicate with us on Twitter and handle us at NTA News Now. Hashtag is BizEx. Join us again on Friday for another package. I am Amina Nujaim. Thank you for watching.